Hello and welcome to this lesson exploring the evolution of our species, Homo sapiens. In the literature, you might see us referred to as Homo sapiens. What does the additional sapiens mean? It kind of indicates a subgroup of the original Homo sapiens population from which all the rest of us have kind of evolved from. You don't see Homo sapiens so much. Um, so I'm going to just refer to us as one species. So I think we're all clear on what constitutes the species Homo sapiens. It's us, and it is in fact absolutely every single person, obviously, on planet Earth. Um, there are no other hominins, although people do refer to them as humans. So there are no other extant hominin species, no Neanderthals, Denisovans, or um, Floresiensis, or yes, anyone else alive now. Some scientists do refer to those individuals as humans, and they call them people. It's hard to say, they're where does that and they where does that distinguishing sort of cut off come between what is an animal and what is then a person. Yes, this is why it's quite a fascinating topic to explore, because along this lineage, at some point, we're going to define the individuals as no longer being animals, but being people. Interesting, fascinating. So the lesson, the learning objectives for this lesson are hopefully for you to be able to explain the out of Africa model of human origins, and just in briefly, that model states that our species Homo sapiens evolved in Africa. By and large, it was always until relatively recently thought that we evolved in East Africa, Sub-Saharan East Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, an area called the Great Rift Valley. Around there is where we found the oldest human fossils. Now, this is an important point to note as well, because obviously being a kind of a linear process of evolution, I say linear, I don't really mean linear, but as in the kind of process of evolution to get to our species, we know that from Darwin's model, means that our species had to evolve from an existing species. What that existing species was, no one is really sure. Some people think it might be Homo erectus or Agaster. Some people think it might be Homo heidelbergensis. And generally we're not sure from which species we evolved. So it was originally thought we evolved in Africa in that Great Rift Valley, and those were the oldest fossils of what are known as anatomically modern humans. So these are fossils that you can dig up and find, and they would look like modern human remains, or the anatomy that we have in our bodies now: the skull, the jaw, the fingers, the bones, the ribs, everything about us. We are anatomically modern humans. And when we as a species evolved and where is still hotly debated. So like I say, the out of Africa model posits that we evolved in Africa. And then we spread out from Africa. So our species evolved in a location. And whether that was like a sort of sympatric or allopatric speciation, who knows? We're definitely sharing Africa with a large number, other hominin species. And then our species, once it had evolved in the out of Africa model, a subgroup of those people left Africa to colonize the rest of the world. I'm looking at slide 2 here, and we've got Homo sapiens evolving there in Africa. You can see East and Southern Africa 200,000 years ago, and then maybe 100,000 years ago, some people say 70,000, 60,000 years, we spread from there across into West Africa, across the Sahara, and across into North and West Africa, and then across into the sort of Middle East 100,000 years ago, into Europe by 40,000 years ago, and then across into Southeast Asia, India, and then Southeast Asia 70,000 years ago. Arriving in Australia, we know that the earliest humans arrived there. Homo sapiens arrived there about 50,000 years ago, spreading onto various different islands. If you have a look, they crossed through into North America by 15,000 years ago, and then from there spread down through the Americas into South America. So that sort of process, that out of Africa model, is supported by fossil evidence and supported by genetic evidence, and we'll explore that in this lesson. The multi-regional model of human origins is the next learning objective I'd like you to be able to explain in some way. Suggests that humans evolved, as the name sort of suggests, in different regions. So about a 1.5 million to 1 million years ago, that species Homo erectus or Homo ergaster spread out through, that hominin species had colonized those same locations. Well, certainly had spread from Africa through Asia, yes, and from there, the multi-regional model sort of suggests that the traits that Homo sapiens possess were evolving in those in that population, and were being selected for as being advantageous. And there was a lot of gene flow, if you remember that concept. We got movement of peoples between those regions and back into Africa, so movement of hominins carrying alleles between, from Africa and out of Africa. So the model suggests that, or puts forward the hypothesis that Homo sapiens evolved in different regions and didn't evolve in one defined sort of location at one defined time and then spread out. But the traits that define us were evolving throughout the hominins, the archaic species of hominin. Interesting. We'll mainly look at the evidence that supports the out of Africa model. Now, I've got a little bit of notes here to introduce the lesson, and I'll read through those. So, broadly speaking, there are two competing hypotheses on the origins of modern humans: the out of Africa hypothesis and the multi-regional hypothesis. Both agree that Homo erectus originated in Africa. That's fine, and like I say, that was, maybe 1.5 to 2 million years ago that species evolved in Africa. But that species evolved out to Eurasia about 1 million years ago. The two models differ in explaining the origin of modern humans. The two main pieces of evidence that are used to piece together the story of the origins of our species are fossils and genetic evidence. Homo sapiens has some defining anatomical features that distinguish our species from other hominins. On our evolutionary tree, distinguish our species from other hominins on our evolutionary tree. These features are things like our face and cranial shape, the lack of a brow ridge, as it's known, the sort of ridge on the brow, and the long limbs and a slender body are some of the sort of main features that may distinguish us and are referred to as anatomically modern. However, there are fossils that can split what are defined as Homo sapiens into two groups. The first group, whose fossils date from between 300,000 to 150,000 years ago, are what is known as archaic Homo sapiens, and the more recent fossils from 150,000 years ago to today are known as modern Homo sapiens. Like I say, this group is sometimes called Homo sapiens sapiens. and these have features that are defined as being anatomically modern humans. You can perhaps appreciate the difficulty in assigning species to fragments of fossilized bones when you consider the range of phenotypes in any modern human population, from babies through to adults. Because we're often dealing with fossils of, babies or children, and distinguishing males, females. It can be really, really difficult. But obviously, the experts are able to place these fossils into different species groups. The range of different fossils that are found and the accuracy and dispute as to which fossils belong to which species, makes this field really complicated. Anyway, the most recent hominins to die out are Homo neanderthalensis, Homo denisovans, and Homo floresiensis. So we know that our species, Homo sapiens, was concurrent with those species. So they were around as our species was around. There may well be others. Homo floresiensis is an island population over in the Far East, and they were very different. The Hobbit people. You have to look up that particular hominin species. But the Denisovans were found in a cave in the Siberia region of Russia, and the Neanderthalensis were originally discovered in a cave in Europe, in Germany, I think. And we know that our species was concurrent with those, and we know that our species bred with those. I'll read on. So there are perhaps others too, but fossils are rare. Each of these species has defining features. So the Neanderthalensis, the Denisovans, and the Floresiensis, defining features in their anatomy and in their cultural fossil evidence. However, we know that for the first two species, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, that where anatomically modern humans encountered them, the Neanderthals were in Europe and the Denisovans in Asia. Our species bred with them, and their genomic DNA is mixed in with our genome. So if you take someone from a European origin, like myself, and sequence my genome, there will be sections of the genome that have come from or are more in common with Neanderthal DNA. How do we know that? Because they have sequenced the genome of the Neanderthal remains that they found. So there are a few Neanderthal bones, fossils, that have yielded DNA. I'm not sure exactly how many, like less than 10, I think. And they've sequenced as much of the genomic information from those cells, from those fossils. And they know that then there are sequences in our genome that are more in common with those sequences of DNA. And therefore they suggest that they became incorporated into the Homo sapiens genome through breeding. And then if you take people from Asian origin and sequence their genomes, they found that there are sequences that have been admixture, as they call it, added in from these Homo denisovans. So we can define Neanderthals and these denisovans as being different to us from their fossils. They are characteristically different to us, to Homo sapiens, and yet our species bred with them, and therefore they, by definition, they almost can't be a different species. And it's a mess. An interesting mess. One of the really interesting aspects of it, though, is if you go to African populations of Homo sapiens and sequence their genome, there is no, do not find these genetic sections that have come from these two additional species, Neanderthals and the Denisovans. So, it's suggestive of in support of the out of Africa theory. Those the populations of humans that Homo sapiens that left Africa then bred with the hominin species that they found in these new locations that they found themselves in. Up until fairly recently, the oldest known anatomically modern human fossil was found in Homo in Ethiopia, and that dates to around 196,000 years ago. That's pretty accurate dating. However, everything was thrown into confusion in 2017 when a fossil skull that was found in Jebel Uhud in Morocco was dated to around 300,000 years old. This find not only pushed the age of human evolution back 100,000 years, but put the location of our species' origins to northwest Africa. As a result of this, scientists have suggested that Homo sapiens may have evolved across Africa with gene flow occurring between hominin populations. So rather than our species evolving, just in, what is a relatively large region of eastern and southern Africa, this older anatomically modern fossil occurring up in Morocco suggests that our species may well be older than 200,000 years, which has been an accepted age for our species for a while, but also that it might well be that anatomically modern humans were evolving across Africa. Yeah, interesting, isn't it? The we will see shortly that the so-called trellis model for the evolution of anatomically modern humans, which is a version of the multi-regional hypothesis, this trellis model, suggests that gene flow between populations could have occurred globally. And it puts forward the idea that anatomically modern humans, as I mentioned earlier, evolved across the original range occupied by Homo erectus, which is, Africa, and then through Asia. There are several key pieces of genetic evidence that support the out of Africa theory. The mitochondrial data, which we will explore shortly, suggests that our species evolved in Africa around 200,000 years ago. That was from a seminal paper published by Khan et al. In, I think, 87. And you will click on videos and watch a couple of professors of genetics who carried out that research, discussing that really key mitochondrial data. So that data, is a massively key bit of information that or evidence that suggests that our species evolved in Africa around 200,000 years ago. Other genetic data, including studies of the Y chromosome and human genetic diversity, suggest that anatomically modern humans then migrated out of Africa around 70,000 years ago. However, this is still hotly debated. And like I say, that 70,000 years ago, on the slide above it said 100,000 years ago. It's varied. But the Y chromosome doesn't carry out much recombination at all with the X chromosome, and therefore, like the mitochondrial DNA, acts as a good marker for following patterns of human evolution, because we can see, where groups of alleles on the Y chromosome get inherited together and passed on. We'll explore that in this lesson. When I said about human genetic diversity studies suggesting that anatomically modern humans evolved in Africa and then migrated out, this you have to think about our lessons on natural selection and speciation. So what this data shows us is that if we go back and look at the genetic diversity, so the number of different alleles in the gene pool for all the different genes for Homo sapiens, if we go to Africa and look and sample African populations, we find the greatest amount of genetic diversity, so the largest number of different alleles for different genes, the most diverse gene pool. Then if we sample DNA from populations of humans further out from Africa, they become increasingly less diverse. So that strongly suggests, if you can imagine, that small groups from the original population, which carry only a subset of the whole population's alleles, have gone on and then colonized new locations. And they call this the serial founder effect. Serial being kind of repeated, founder effect, with the founder effect being that that's only a subset of the alleles from the population, from the gene pool, have moved on to colonize a new location. In 2018, however, in a cave in Israel, a jaw and teeth were found of an anatomically modern human that were dated to 180,000 years ago. So, although genetic data has suggested that we left Africa, evolved in Africa, and then left it around, so evolved around 200,000 years ago, and then left it around 180,000 years, 100,000 years ago, we then found fossils of anatomically modern humans dated to 180,000 years old. Now, that could be suggestive of a failed early migration of a group of Homo sapiens out of Africa, or it could just be that we're wrong about the time that humans left Africa. And, this was part of the original wave of humans that left Africa to colonize the rest of the world. I'll end with this field of research is fascinating, rapidly changing, and filled with differences in opinion, each of which is supported by different interpretations of the relatively sparse data available. This week's lessons will help you explore this topic and also prepare you for your assignment.